Hello. Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed the coffee break and the last minutes at the design hotspot. We are going to get started with the panel discussion, which will be guided by Dan Podjed. So it's time for these brilliant minds to all clash together and produce some spark. So, this is a traditional panel discussion. Dan Podjed will be asking some questions to all of our speakers except for Miguel, who wasn't able to stay with us today. So please start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the Why the World Needs Anthropologists panel discussion. And as Veronica said, this will be a very classical discussion. So I have to classically introduce my guests. So here, on my left side, on your right side, is Kirah, and next to her, Jamer Hunt, then José Manuel dos Santos, and Sarah Pink, and at the end of the row, Rosa Maria Perez. And first of all, I would like to start with our clothing, because this is not what I usually wear, and I suffer for the whole of this hot day. I never wear a tie. This is really once a year opportunity to have this kind of hegemonic male clothing. And I think that guys that you showed on the photos, like Donald Trump and Rumsfeld, that they really suffer in their life, actually. But
that's why they're so unhappy.
That's why.
you think
Yes.
this is what makes their faces so unhappy? Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
Around the neck
Yeah.
all day long.
But still, now serious. Okay, now it has to be a classical discussion. I have to ask you a serious question. So, what is the future of anthropology in the world led by the people like Donald Trump?
Okay. So, does anyone else want to take this?
I think that's yours.
Yeah, thank you.
Should we change the anthropology? Will it remain the same? Will
no.
there be any anthropology?
Well, certainly Donald Trump doesn't care about anthropology, so he's going to leave it alone. I guess the question is whether the mission of anthropology should change because of Donald Trump, and I thought we heard today many good reasons why it should. And so, I think that there's a question that we should be asking ourselves and about the kinds of participation in the public and publics of various kinds in order to sort of figure out the role. But, there has been, within anthropology as I learned it, a nervousness and anxiety around the concept of intervention. And when I was co-chairing a design and anthropology committee at the new school, it was only when we got to the word intervention that we could really have a conversation. Because before then we didn't really understand each other. But at that point, we started to really get something to talk about. Because the anthropologists were terrified of intervention because they felt like they should live their lives behind a glass, observing and leaving no trace. And the designers were willing to dive in and intervene at any moment. Like ask them to go out on the street and talk to people, they go do that. And so, both suffered from a syndrome. And, that's, I think, in part for anthropologists, it's trying to figure out how to craft a practice that has a kind of activism or public engagement quality to it. And I think we've seen models, and there are models, and it's not the norm. Applied anthropology in the U.S. context is a dirty word. But that's got to change.
What did you say?
It's a dirty word.
Anthropology is
Applied anthropology is a dirty word. It's second class.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S., it's a second class, if not third class
But still
status.
you have in the U.S., you had in the U.S. already in 1990s over 2,000 applied anthropologists working for the industry. We did the study in 2016 in Europe. We have approximately 500 to 600 people working, anthropologists working in the industry. So in Europe, I think applied anthropology is even more dirty. So let's get dirty now.
Yeah.
Okay, Anna.
Yeah, let's get dirty is right. Well, one of the things, you know, I think that Jamer has brought up a very important point. My own experiences, I was the chief design anthropologist for Microsoft globally, and also worked with Boeing for before I went rogue, well, even more rogue. But the interesting thing is, as academia at that time, when I started in the 90s, I was the black sheep and was in quite deep waters with anthropology departments in the academia. And one of the things that finally, I think, bridged this gap with the intervention side, I remember when I was welcomed back and allowed to speak in anthropology conferences, was a very important thing. And that is that one of the most beautiful things of becoming an anthropologist is both learning two qualities. One is the humbleness at which we understand cultures from their perspective and not our own. And the second is ethics. So built into the way in which we learn anthropology is a very strong sense of ethics. And the work I did, I was the founder of this people-centered approach to innovation, because it was the only way I could imagine doing it with ethics, was involving the very people we serve in the process. And I think it's very important when we talk about intervention and what's going on, it's not our ideas, it's not we who make the decisions, but that we facilitate the possibilities out there. And that's what happens in each project is that we're doing it together. It's not my idea or an engineer's idea or a aid worker's idea. It's that we facilitate, and what happens when we do that facilitation in that process of discussing and understanding, and again we come back to the transdisciplinarity of it, is that people own their own solutions. And they are motivated by owning their own solutions, and that means owning the success and failure of their solutions. And that's a very important piece here for me. Yeah.
So going back to this dirty word, applied anthropology.
Oh, and that's dirty, by the way. I don't call myself an applied anthropologist. I'm a practitioner.
But I think it doesn't matter at the end of the day. So we all know what you do.
Whatever.
Come on.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, you work for the industry and...
I work for the industry, public
it.
and private.
But still, there are, even in Europe, in the context of Europe, huge differences between the countries, between the north and west, south and east. Sarah, you have experience even from the other side of the world, from Australia and from the UK. What can we do to spark, ignite this applied anthropology also in, I don't know, Slovenia, Portugal, Switzerland maybe, Germany, from your experience, from the UK, of course, which is one of the epicenters, after all, of applied anthropology?
It's interesting that you see the UK as an epicenter of applied anthropology now, because I guess in the 1990s it wasn't. And at that time, applied anthropologists did feel excluded. They felt that they were doing an impure or problematic type of anthropology and weren't really part of the academy or the mainstream. But what has been really interesting is that since then, and now I see that there's an active applied anthropology network in the UK. Applied anthropology is increasingly important. The impact agenda, whether or not we like it or think that it's a really, really good idea, is also something that drives those kinds of applications of anthropology in the UK context. But what happened in the UK, at least partly, was that around, I don't know, 15 or 18 years ago, the Association of Social Anthropologists invited me to join their committee as an officer who would actually try to bring together applied anthropology with the association. And as part of that, we ran a seminar series, which was funded by the ESRC in the UK, and drew together anthropologists from different sectors, from industry, from health, from education, from, I can't remember them all now. And we had a series of 3 events. And on the basis of that, then really pushed the agenda forward, and also established a book series which is now called Studies in Public and Applied Anthropology. And one of the books, Anthropology, well, Mr. Sefkin's book, Anthropology and the Corporate Encounter, was published in that series. And the whole idea of it was to bring together applied and academic anthropology. So I think that was the right moment. And I think that's what tends to happen when we have these turns and these waves in anthropology. There's always a right moment. There's a moment when it doesn't happen. And that's often to do with the mainstream academy and its agendas, and also wider political and economic and social context. But sometimes the right moment's there. And I think it's about seeking those right moments or creating the circumstances for them, and then pushing them forward through activities, through events, and through demonstrations of the value of anthropology.
And maybe there is a problem because we have this, also we in this room have this stereotypical image that applied anthropology is anthropology working with industry, with business. I think this is the first image that often comes to our minds, not just to my mind.
But it didn't used to be in the UK.
I know, but I think we should turn this around. I mean, NGOs, governmental sector. I mean, we should get anthropologists employed in this kind of organizations to make the change.
Yes,
We are.
We are, but we lose our title, you know? Yeah, not you, but I mean, there are so many anthropologists employed in NGOs, in different kind of companies, on the national television, for example. They become journalists, they become project managers, they become, I don't know, puppeteers, and they're not anthropology puppeteers, they're just puppeteers.
Yeah, and I think it's been difficult
I
for
think
people
this is
to
the
call
problem.
themselves anthropologists for a long time.
Sorry?
I think it's been difficult for anthropologists to call themselves anthropologists in those roles for a long time. But I think that it's changing now. And I know that I've been approached to work on things because I'm an anthropologist in more recent years, whereas I think maybe if you asked me the same question about 7 years ago, I would have said, no, I never tell anyone I'm an anthropologist.
Who was it? Was it you, José, who said that anthropology is a fad, right?
Well, I asked.
We have to interrogate you a little bit about this word.
I asked because there's more people. I've heard more people coming forward and saying it, which is a good sign. But at the same time, you kind of wonder. So you do remember my second slide that I'm not an anthropologist. So
Yes,
you know,
yes.
So, and that person that shall not be named, for me, it's not exactly who he is, but what he represents. And for me, the most troublesome part of this is what happened before, what's happening now, and what's going to happen after, and what's happening in different places of the world. But I would also like to, those that know me kind of hate me for this when I say it, but I always say to the people that work with me that we are part of the problem and part of the solution. And so what's happening right now is that there's a large part of the United States that was really left abandoned by everybody, including anthropologists. There's several maps that show when ethnography studies were done, where they were done, and they were done in that, in that the so-called the sides of the map, and nobody dared or wanted or went in. And so there was a lack of understanding, of empathy, of recognition of what a lot of what was happening. Right now in Canada, we were just talking about, from the outside, people might be really, in love with certain characters there, but the people that live there, they're feeling that that's the same. So my question is, what is the part that we all, and now I'm a part of being an anthropologist, but what is our role in really making sure that we also help some of this understanding come forth before it turns into some of the ugly things that we're seeing, and then, generate the kind of answers that are happening. So I want to make sure that we don't, position ourselves outside of this, and I could talk about the Portugal or Brazil or any other places.
Rosa, since we are in Lisbon, I really wanted to ask you, and this is my first time in Lisbon, by the way, in Portugal, actually.
That's good.
And
Welcome.
I really like it here, so it's beautiful country, city. But what's the status of anthropology in Portugal? How easy or difficult is it, for example, for anthropologists here in Portugal to get a job?
Well, first of all, there isn't this debate about applied anthropology in Portugal because, the problem is indeed, as you mentioned, to get a job. So I would say that if you get a degree in anthropology, the main job possibilities would be municipalities. Well, first of all, it would be research, or if you are very, very lucky, you can get a job, a position at the university, which has become more and more difficult nowadays. And so the other opportunities are mainly municipalities, mostly Lisbon municipality. It has employed quite a lot of anthropologists, of young anthropologists and not so young anthropologists, and keeps on renovating its staff of anthropologists. So, and also museums all over the country. They keep hiring anthropologists, not in a big scale. We are talking about a small country which doesn't have that huge number of museums, and also there is a tradition of employing local technicians, not necessarily anthropologists. There are few, but very few, who get jobs in a few corporations. And nowadays, since Portugal has adopted a very friendly politics toward asylum seekers and refugees, now, for example, at my center of research, we have a group of anthropologists who work with refugees, and some anthropologists, a few, get some jobs working with refugees, immigrants. So that is the main labor market, if you
but
can.
But these are actually good new models, also
well,
models
it's
for
good,
other
but not
countries.
when you think of the possibilities, but some of them are virtual. I mean, the number is not as big as it could be.
But you said that this is a problem of small countries, but I wouldn't underestimate small countries, because first of all, I come from Slovenia. This is one thing with 2 million inhabitants.
I loved
and
Slovenia.
there is number 2, Denmark. As far as I know from our study, I think approximately 1/4 of anthropologists working in industry and business are from Denmark, actually. So, unfortunately, there is nobody here from Denmark. We should ask Stefan Jönke, who is probably somewhere here
just to add
in the room. But what is the trick? I mean, I think each country has to find its own trick, its own, which can be then shared with other countries. Like you said, there are anthropologists employed in municipalities here.
Yes.
I think this is excellent.
It is, but, well, there could be more. I think there is a civic education and public education that anthropologists must be engaged in doing. The other thing I'd like to do, I think there is maybe still in audience, Carlotta. Are you there, Carlotta? No. And there are other 2 students of anthropology. They were bright students that I have at a certain point, and they decided to do a PhD abroad, and then they joined different NGOs. Well, some anthropologists, of course, join NGOs. This is a traditional job market. And nowadays they work in different places of the world. But I think that, well, we used to travel all over the world. We were famous for, but nowadays anthropologists don't tend to travel a lot. So I think it's also the young people, I try to encourage them to go abroad and look for different experiences, possibilities. And there is a different market outside to look for. So this is another possibility which so far has not been very much explored.
Thank you. Okay, now we know what's the situation in Europe, but the title, and in the world, but the title of this event is Designing the Future. So let's now have a look in the crystal ball. We have 5 experts here. First, Anna. You worked, as you said, as a design anthropologist in Boeing, Microsoft, several other companies. You helped designing airplanes, operating systems. But now we have a really tricky job for you. Let's imagine for a moment you are the chief designer of the world.
I'm not. And
I know,
never
but
would
let's
be alone.
imagine that you are.
Okay.
How would you design the future? What are the main issues that should be addressed? You showed us some of them in your speech, but what would be like the first thing that should be done right now, immediately, so the future will be better for all of us?
So one of the things I think it's, that's a very unfair question because it's so against my personality and my belief system, because I really believe we can't do things alone, and that's too much ego for one person. So I could never do it alone, but I have I'm obsessed with sustainability in the future, which is why I showed you the United Nations sustainability goals. And I think saving the planet is such a huge thing, but it's not the planet. Nature will resolve itself. I'm convinced today that with the permafrost melting, in the Arctics, we're going to get all killed by some virus or bacteria that comes out of the permafrost that's millions of years old that we're not ready for. But that kind of thing, we're going to die. That's the thing. Nature will survive. Nature has always survived. So if we want to save humanity, then we need to take action, because I think we are, Al Gore talked about the tipping point. I think we're over it. So what we do and how we make those decisions might need some soft dictatorship. Mm-hmm. Not of the Trumpian style, but the hope is that we get together. But to do that, we need to work with the disenfranchised. I mentioned that. You just talked about it too. They have not been listened to, and if we don't actively listen and engage and bring them along, the divide will become bigger and bigger. So if I had one thing to do, it is that area, because I don't believe hate will help us. And how do we turn that anger that they have into something that is powerful and useful? In my work, interestingly enough, in any of my jobs I've had in public sector, private sector, NGOs, wherever I've been, I always find one of these grumpies. These guys who are just real pain in the asses. Usually men, sometimes women, who really push against, and, I make this goal. My goal is to get, that's the guy. I never try to keep them out of the projects. I invite them in. And the reason for that is because when you can convince one of those real pain in the asses, they use all their energy to tell everybody how incredible this is. So it's the easiest way to get movement in an organization is to find the guy who's really pushing your button and really irritating you and invite them in. Because you got to understand why. What is going on with that person? So, take that and, and apply it to a much larger scale. We need to go look at those people that we're afraid of, that we're uncomfortable with, who vote for Trump, who vote in Brazil, in what we understand them. Instead of what we do instead is clash, and it requires active listening and that humbleness I talked about earlier. And otherwise, we're going to just clash.
Thank you, Anna.
Was that
so
good
this
enough?
Is Anna's recipe for the future, but it was a.
Was that okay?
It was a solid answer, yeah. But look, you say that people will sooner or later die out. But some other predictions...
If we don't do something,
yeah,
because...
okay, but
yeah.
Let me finish. But
okay.
There are other predictions for the humankind. We will actually become older and older, live longer and longer. By the end of the century, the number of people older than 100 years will increase by more than 50 times, from 500,000 today to over 26 million. Sarah, perhaps question for you. What will be the role of anthropologists in designing new solutions for the elderly people? How can anthropologists engage here?
I think a little bit like the previous answer, I wouldn't want to tackle that question on my own. And so to do that, I would bring together a group of, I have a list in my head, of all the brightest and most collaborative and wonderful people I've already worked with. And so I think to even approach a question like that, I would want to work with the organizations who already design technologies for people and who already have in mind that there's something to be done there. I'm going to be one of those people. It's not like I'm going to be designing for future old people. I'm designing for myself.
I am one of them.
in my relatively near future. So there's something there about bringing people together.
But
so
also
that we
the
can
definition of being old has
plan
changed significantly.
Yeah.
So we're not old, for example,
No, none
here,
of us
so
are
we're still
yet.
young.
No.
I'm feeling it in my fingers.
We'll maybe never be. I mean, that's the other question. A lot of my work is around uncertainty. So maybe we will actually all never be old enough to be old anymore if the goalposts are moving. But yeah, I mean, you're asking difficult questions, so you're not going to get a good answer.
Yes, of course. I mean, I have to. Sorry, that's my role. Another difficult question. So experts predict that the climate change that you talked about, Anna, will influence huge migrations in the future. By the year 2050, 250 million people might have to leave their homes and move elsewhere. So among the most endangered areas is India, with almost 1.4 billion inhabitants. So Rosa, this is your field, because you are an expert in India. How do you see the future of research in India, or the living in India, which will significantly change?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert. I would need 10,000 lives to be an expert, and I only have one. Well, but there are already many problems related to climate change in India. There are people that are dislocated on a permanent basis and then on a dramatic basis in India. First of all, due to climate changes, mostly in eastern India, in the Gulf of Bengal, which is a very, it's a very troubled area, and also due to political decisions. For example, in Gujarat, where I carried out this research, Mr. Modi decided to do a beautiful garden and a beautiful riverside by the Sabarmati, where was the Gandhi ashram, and it just dried the south. So no fields for agriculture. It dried up the fields, so the agriculture was finished. So there are many problems due to climate changes in India and due to different problems related to this kind of issues. And there are people that suddenly don't have a house, don't have a living, don't have anything. But in the future, you asked me how do I envisage?
Yeah, what will be the role of anthropologists there in the research, how will ethnography change, for example, in the time of climate change?
I don't think
what will be research? Will migration be the topic #1? It is already.
It is. I don't think that ethnography will change or must change, because, I mean, ethnography already deals with these kinds of problems in India. But I think that, again, it will require the collaborative work with other experts. First of all, you need, and that work has already started for example, in Kutch, a desert area in Western India. You need to get together with designers and architects and, to an extent, engineers. So it's not about doing ethnography, but it's also about trying to think of a place where you can build houses and where people can be safer, more protected from, for example, floods or, this kind of accidents. So I don't think that ethnography per se will change or must change or have to change. But what I think is that more and more anthropologists will require a collaborative work with other disciplinaries. I mean, I think that at this stage of our time and of all the social and political changes that are taking place, the lonely anthropologist who goes to the field and romantically stays there doesn't, I mean, of course he or she exists, but has no social existence at all, and civic, and I wonder if even he or she has an ethical purpose, because there are so many problems going on.
Okay, another scenario from the future, even more bizarre one. Ray Kurzweil, the futurist inventor, one of the main developers now in Google, by the way, predicts something even more fascinating for our future. By the year 2045, machines will become super intelligent. He calls this moment in time the technological singularity. And nobody knows what will happen next. Will humans merge with technologies and with the artificial intelligence? Will we gradually die out? Will the AI simply exterminate us? So, José, for example, this could be a question for you. You're from the world of the industry. You're developing these kind of tools of the future. What do you think about this scenario? First, you, like, you're the responsible now for the future.
I'm part of this panel of people that also think that no one alone can do these things. So I'm a big fan of co-creation because I believe in the other side of co-creation, which is co-ownership. So usually I drive both at the same time. But I also believe in the power of ideas. And so that balance is usually what drives me. My film, the film of my life, was when it came out, and on version 2 it still is, which is Blade Runner. And what I like about it is that there's a certain way to portray the future where there's good robots, bad robots, good machines, bad machines, good people, bad people. And so there is a co-living of different entities, some of them more cybernetic than others. But in the end, everybody shares the same tendency to do mistakes, to be imperfect, to fall apart, to grow old, to not grow old. So everything that it seems that there's a projection that everything that we will design will be in a lot of ways shaped to our own imperfections. And I hope that that's going to continue. The other thing that it shows, and I also think that that's going to happen, is this: just in case that's not the reality, we will all become hackers, some sort of hackers, and some sort of, we will all know ways of to bring down microsystems, larger systems and things. I mean, today we do it in a very simple way when we try to hide our identity in Facebook, and that's already a very small way of hacking the system that wants you to be transparent. But then in the future, I have the feeling that everybody in one way or another will become some sort of hacker. And so in the end, either I'm a positive or just damn, stupid. But I do think that, we will find this balance between designing a world which will reflect a lot of who we are and what we are, and at the same time, designing all the safeguards, hacking being one of them, to continue to break down whenever things start to go wrong.
So you think that hacking is actually positive, if I understand you right?
I do
because
think.
It corrects the system and shows what are the mistakes in the system.
Yes.
So also the institutions need hackers, like European
they already,
Union needs
They
hackers.
already have them.
They already have them. They're already employing them.
United States needs hackers
They have
to try to destroy. Like the human organisms need hackers. These are the so-called parasites. Because
vaccines,
with them we improve through time.
Yes.
Is this your metaphor?
Yes.
Okay.
I do think that that's one way or another. They might not want to be called hackers, just like the anthropologists.
But it's better than
but
parasites
they will
anyway.
Be, yes.
Jamer, now a question for you. Actually, a quote. You might recognize this one. Mass production, as we know it, will soon be extinct. So, say goodbye to the heavy metals. I guess heavy metal music or not.
No.
Huge warehouses and durable goods, and say hello to the bearable lightness of living networks, metabolism, and code. Where is this from?
It's a quiz.
Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
You're being filmed. It's fine. It's a quiz. Go for it.
Yeah. So I wrote that probably 20 years ago, Manifesto for Post-Industrial Design, published in ID magazine that sadly no longer exists.
And you predicted at that time the future in which we live now. I mean, this is why I was so fascinated by your manifesto, because you showed us the world that we live in. How is it different from your predictions?
I think it's interesting. I think industries persisted, will persist in ways that I was trying to suggest that it might move in more biological directions, that in order to be more sustainable, that we would need to start thinking about the making of things more in the ways that we, understand living things to be created, cohabitate, die, turn into food, things like that. So all of the cradle-to-cradle kinds of thinking that industry would move in that direction. It's clearly...
It's Industry 4.0,
yeah,
what you're talking about.
So maybe
How much?
6.
6.0.
Yeah.
Okay, we're now at 6. Okay,
we're
living
a
in
long way
the
from
2010.
But there are lots of movements in those directions. These things are slow to change. I think that's, it's one of the things we can maybe be hopeful about, that one might see these sorts of changes. But I was not expecting that all of the energy of industrial design would move towards information, mobility, apps, software. I think that what was fundamentally not part of what I saw at that point was this idea that design would really move into the immaterial, but in ways that were deeply saturated into our everyday experiences and would produce all of the sort of complex good and bad results that we see today. I had no idea of that. And, I think I was at that moment very much within the realm of industrial design and yet shocked at the fact that we were still sort of making things in a 19th century kind of way. And it seemed to me it was obvious we needed to move to something different from that. But, and we've moved a little bit, but not really. Some companies have tried, but not really. And, if we live within capitalism, it's hard to see much change.
But in time that you described, let's say it's Industry 4.0, whatever we call it, is this an opportunity for anthropology, or is it a danger for anthropology? Will we become useless in time of digital networks, big data, the algorithms that can predict our behavior better than ourselves? Yesterday, an anecdote, so I lost a phone in a taxi, and then I was in huge panic, and I didn't know what to do. You know what I did? So I typed in Google, "Where is my phone?" And it spotted it, actually. And then with a friend of mine who is here, then we tracked the taxi. We picked another taxi and tracked that taxi around Lisbon and actually got it at the police station. Wow. So it was So yeah.
Google saves everything.
No, the guy from Lisbon saved my phone. The taxi driver saved my phone. But the question that I didn't know what to do. You're in shock when you lose your phone. And I typed in Google, "Where is my phone?"
Yeah.
And it gave me the answer. This is crazy. I mean, this works.
Yeah.
For the first time, I realized this works.
Without
And we're asking even
violence
more crazy questions. People ask questions such as, "Is my penis big enough?" This is an actual question.
I ask Siri if she loves me every single day.
And
I get a different response every single day.
of
Ask
course.
Siri.
Of course, what's
Because
the
she
difference
knows.
between the mirror and Siri? I think, yes, it's the
So
same.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, what worries me is that you're so comfortable with the idea that Google knows where your phone is. So,
I'm not comfortable. I'm happy.
you're happy.
In the
got
case,
his phone
in the
back.
case
So-
where it was possible.
Yeah.
I think that
terrified.
we have to understand the trade-offs, and we have to be critical media consumers. And the problem is we're not, and we don't teach it. We don't teach it to our children. We don't teach it in school. We don't learn it. We have we're so mesmerized by the possibilities that we don't understand the basic lessons of civics, of community, of power, control, information, knowledge. All these things that we've known that were the simple lessons of the 60s, really, in some ways. I mean, these are not new ideas. But we have, we're a generation of people who are so enamored by the conveniences of Google and by the miracles of Google. And I share, a sense of the miracle.
Yeah.
And that's the miracle potential of AI and all those kinds of things. But let's be real about this. I mean, the fact that they know where your phone is terrifying. And the fact that 5 companies will own the future of AI is terrifying. And unless we can find a way to restore a balance between sort of the public and the private in our lives, we will continue to be sort of at the mercy of a few organizations and a few industries that will control more and more of the sort of mind share of what we do. And I think we, you know, part of it is that we have to kind of rebuild and reimagine civil society, and we have to reimagine our governmental or non-governmental infrastructures in such a way that we can get some of that balance back and understand the power that they have, the sort of the resources they've consumed, and the ways in which we may want to recalibrate those things. And Europe's doing a better job of it than the United States, for sure.
So Anna has a quick
replic, not a replic, because I actually agree with everything he said, but I wanted to take it one step further because it goes back to the question you had about what is anthropology in the future. Because this is the world we have today, and there is more control over you and where you are than you know, and that is the way it is. It's not, I'm not trying to scare you, it's a fact. And one of the interesting things is that you see on the one hand people screaming that we need more STEM education because we need more technologists to make more. And one of the interesting things is coders don't realize that they're actually going to code their own jobs away. So that's a phenomenal piece. The other place is, so what about us? They need anthropologists. Technology needs anthropologists and historians and the social sciences and humanities and design to help us understand these consequences and to mitigate for it so that we don't end up in the bad and the good that Jose talks about. Because yeah, there's good people, there's bad people. There's good hackers, there's bad hackers. There's good technologies and bad technologies. We're always going to have that. And the whole point is to find the balance. And that's what we need us for.
Thank you, Anna. Now a tricky question for Sarah.
Great.
So listen carefully.
Make it really
yeah, it gets tougher. Listen to this quote and please tell me where is it from.
Here we go.
We are stubbornly transdisciplinary and transnational. We collaborate, hybridize, and compromise. We break boundaries and network without fear of incapacity or contamination.
That's one of the points on the manifesto, the 10-point manifesto of the Future Anthropologies Network.
10 points?
One of the 10
10 points for you.
One of the 10 points. Which was developed in 2014 by 30 anthropologists who collectively wrote 10 points, which were then aggregated by 4 anthropologists into a list of 10. And it's been published in our book, Future Anthropologies. It's chapter 1. And it's also published on the Future Anthropology Network website. So
this is the perfect answer. So
it,
one applause for Sarah, please. But what is really important is that this point from Manifesto, I think, really nicely describes your career, which is far from being straightforward and normal. I mean, you look normal, but your career is not. And once you told me you have never been employed in a classical anthropological institution department, how do you feel about it? Bad? Good? Are you a traitor?
This is a good time.
Or are you a game changer?
I've never worked in an anthropology department, and I've found my career very enriching. Precisely. I'm sure I would have found it enriching had I worked in a classical anthropology department as well, but it would have been enriching differently. And I've valued all of the different colleagues who I've worked with in the different departments that I've worked in because they all bring new questions and new challenges to my work. So I think the best place for an anthropologist is outside their anthropology department. We're trained as anthropologists, we're trained to be in situations where we're different.
That's a great,
that's the fundamental,
answer.
Thing of anthropological training. So why would we want to work with other anthropologists all the time? We need to be with other anthropologists. That's why all of us are anthropologists are here right now. It sustains us. But we also need to be in other places, and that's where I think we can do much of our best work.
Let's give a word now also.
Yeah, of course. That was so nicely said.
If there are any questions, just raise your hands. We will try to spot you. For any one of the panelists, yeah? No? Not yet? If you change your mind, you can still do it. Hey, Anna, it's again your turn. Your mantra is, do not design for people, design with them. This is what you repeat quite often. But how can you change mindsets of designers and engineers to start thinking in this kind of people-centered way? Is it any quick recipe?
Nope.
What? Okay. This was a really brief answer.
There's no, can you want me to elaborate or not?
No, it's okay. You don't have to elaborate. But what about the another way around? Aren't we anthropologists relying or people-centered
This people-centered approach.
with the people-centered approach, relying on people too much and hoping that they create their own products, policies, services, whatever they do? Aren't then the experts like designers, architects, spatial planners, engineers, economists, social designers, all these experts aren't just merely passive facilitators instead of active producers of new solutions for the people? You're just stealing their knowledge from them and giving it to the people.
No.
And saying that, okay, people have the answer, and also blaming people for all the solutions that they created.
No, I'm blaming the engineers and for all the, no. I think there's, you've put it in very black and white, and nothing in life is black and white other than the fact that we are born and we die. I think that the issue is, again, it's about balance, because the world has been balanced too far on one side, where we're told, even if you think about the fact that products are made and then the whole advertisement industry comes in and tells us we need it, and we get into this, and we've been passive participants in this world of consumerism. If we take the private sector. And one of the issues is when if you take the Adjumani case, I don't know which case to take, out of my head real quick to have something concrete. But the point is when we actively involve all beneficiaries, and all beneficiaries of a product means the developer, the engineer, the architect, the people we serve, involved with it, the anthropologist, working together, the designer, working together to come up with that, and then comes the expert hat. So you throw away the expert hat at the point when you're trying to solve the challenges, but when you have the solution, technology enables it, perhaps, and the anthropologist can double check what are the possible consequences of this technology that we're building. And then the technologist, of course, I don't know how to code worth shit. So, of course, the power of the different disciplines comes at different times, and it has to do with different times in this process. But if we go in with our expert hats and go into battle because we think we know best, then we're challenged again there. So it's about finding balances. There is no one way to do it. Context will decide. Every project I've ever done is different.
We have a question there in the middle. And then I have a tricky question later for the audience, but first, let's take this question.
You thought you were getting away with that.
Ooh.
Hi, I'm Carla.
Hi, Carla.
I'm not an anthropologist. I've been through design school, engineering school, management school, and it's not really a question, it's more like a comment. So this, the question of, the title of this event, why the world needs anthropologists, I think the question will be, why the world needs me? And then I will find my value, as Jammer was saying. So what do I bring to the world? And then being an anthropologist, or being a designer, or being an engineer, it's the how I deliver that value. So I think it's a little bit over this that we have to think about.
very nice.
Thank you.
Very
It's a good
good.
assertion.
Thank you. We have another question in the back.
Next time, you better come up here.
In the back first.
Hi, my name's Dirta, and I actually wanted to make a comment which leads on from Anna's talk earlier, which is about toxic bodies. And I had the pleasure 2 days ago of meeting Eva Domanska, who researches also on death. And she discovered that actually near a crematorium in Chicago, there was a higher rate of cancer because of the bodies being burnt that had silicon in them. So silicon is toxic, and that sort of creates cancer then for future generations. And I guess especially to the female members of the audience, please share that knowledge, know that knowledge and share that knowledge. There's a whole debate there about the pornography industry, but right now about the toxicity in women's bodies and what that does in their lifetime and afterwards. But leading on from that, my question to the panel would be, how do you see in this future world and the future of anthropology the materiality of the body, the physicality of the body, the physiology of the body, given that we're in certain parts of anthropology and science and technology studies speaking about multi-species, multi-material environments? How does that inflect the design and anthropology debate?
Who would like to answer?
I can.
Yeah,
Go
please.
ahead.
No, Sarah.
I think for me, the human body is part of the environment that we're living in and we're moving forward with, and we're us, our technology, our bodies, our environments, we're all part of the same thing, and we're all changing together and moving on into the future together. So it's not a separate future for the human body at all. And I think going back to some of the earlier discussions about what should we be doing now, then we need to be taking responsibility for the way that that human body will be part of a future world. And we need to be thinking about the relationship between, for example, the human body and artificial intelligence. And how does that relationship, do we want to configure that relationship, and how might it be differently configured for different people in different parts of the world, in different moments of their lives? So it's a big question. There's no easy answer, but there's an abstract answer for you.
Jim, you also had a comment on
this? Yeah, I was just going to add that I think the discovery and the sort of research that's going around, or that's going on right now around the human microbiome is really fascinating, and it's almost a kind of paradigmatic shift in the understanding of human subjectivity that in some ways connects up to the kind of multi-species thinking, and that is that, you know, the idea of the singular I, the Cartesian subject that thinks and therefore is being slowly sort of rewritten as a kind of ecosystem of hundreds of millions, if not, I think it's trillions, of bacteria that comprise all parts of our body and that have profound effects on our health, our intelligence, our wellness, our brains, all the systems that we work with. And so there's a really interesting moment where we may be redefining the human, in fact, and not in terms of AI, that will have some impact as well, but just in terms of what we think the human is. We think of it as this entity distinct from nature. Instead, you know, we're an organization of cells with holes, and those holes create porous moments where other organisms can live within us, and hundreds of millions do. And they continue on without us, and we've seen them as the enemy for 200 or since Pasteur. And now we're starting to see that they're actually our friends too. And so it'd be really interesting to think about the ways in which the understanding of the microbiome may fundamentally reshape our notion of subjectivity into a kind of collectivity rather than a sort of atomistic individual.
Thank you. So we have one more question there.
Okay. Hi, my name is S. Thank you all for your presentations. So I've been thinking a little bit on this panel. A lot of it felt very high level, that is like very kind of macro, and I think of anthropology and the sort of, I guess, ethnographic sensibility that I bring to my work. I work in industry at Microsoft. And I'm curious about the micro moments of why the world needs anthropology, of actually doing the thing. And so I'm wondering if a few of you could answer, when was a time where you weren't really clear on your value and you completely, utterly failed in convincing a key stakeholder of what that value was, bringing your kind of ethnographic eye? And how did you pivot in future projects after that sort of failing?
For whom is this
really good
question?
one.
For
I
Anna?
think-
All the anthropologists.
I would love to hear from I don't know. I was curious about Jamer and Sarah, but
Jamer and Sarah. Okay, just
very
pick one.
arbitrarily.
I have something to say. I don't think anthropology ever fails. Anthropology can't fail. Ethnography can't fail, because even if you don't find out the thing that somebody maybe expected you would find out, you'll find out something else. So, and you always have something to move on with.
Well, and I agree with that, but on a project where people are maybe holding you to different value standards, how do you communicate that
Just
and
tell them that.
pivot from that?
Tell them what they need to know.
Yep.
Record this and play it back.
Yeah.
Anna, what do you think?
Well, I've been in the situation maybe you've been in with even trying to deal with something. And one of the great lessons, I agree with what you say completely, because you feel like you failed to convince. But when particularly with product development or service development, what often happens is if they say, no, you know, you're full of shit, you don't know anything, where are your numbers? That's the usual one. You go, okay, you let it go, and when you're right, X number of weeks later, they come back and say, how did you know? And then you can explain how you do it. And the other piece is, instead of fighting them, take them on a journey. I have a case at the Oslo airport where signage was the problem. And they kept saying, well, we have the signs and it says what to do. And I said, but nobody sees the signs. Yes, they do. They're right there. And I'm, nope, nope. So I took them with me and pretended. I was like, now you're going to pretend that you're leaving the airport. Where's the sign? And they'd go right there. And I said, but can you see the sign? No, because the sunlight came in there, so they couldn't see any of the signage because sun blocks the signage. And then they understood why nobody was knowing where to go. And once they saw that, they kind of go, oh. And then they see, and then they want to fix. So it's about showing the path instead of fighting the path. And when you take a battle, pick your battles. And when you pick a battle and lose, it's never a loss. Guaranteed. It only feels like it for a while.
Thank you.
She just asked, can I offer a quick answer?
Yeah.
Yes, quick. Okay, really quick.
I'll give you only one. One was in the back seat of Hartmut Esslinger's BMW driving to a restaurant. He was the head of frog design where I worked, and he asked, why the fuck did we hire an anthropologist? And I had no idea what to say to him as he was driving me to dinner. But more to the point, a bit later, I was working on a project, still at Frog Design, for Unilever, which was designing a line of Tiger Woods men's grooming products. And I really thought I had reached sort of the end, that this was the worst possible thing I could contribute to society. And around the time our son was born, and I simply decided, because I had a full-time teaching job at the same time and half-time at Frog, I decided that I would leave that job, despite the extra money, because I wanted to help raise a son, and because it didn't fit my values. And I realized at that point what was important to me was to have work that fit with my values, and I just didn't feel like, adding more Tiger Woods products to the world was something that I wanted to spend my time on. And so, I changed.
Thank you. Okay, now the final question for everyone here in the room, excluding you, because you got enough questions. So just this side of the room, in your scheme, the bottom of the diagram.
Yeah.
Okay,
The lower
another quote, this time for you. And the one who answers the first, whose quote is that, gets a beer from me to motivate you, or a glass of wine. So the one who answers first, and raises his hand first. Okay.
No incorrect answers count.
There are no incorrect answers, No,
But
just one
answer
is correct. Please listen. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it.
I know.
Who? Yes, but she was the first. But what is his first name? Groucho Marx. Who? Yeah, congratulations. Well done. And these words are also inscribed in his grave, actually tombstone. And I guess it's also time for anthropology to do something similar. First, we have to change our own attitude. And second, we should start making change. So what should be our next steps in making the dirty applied anthropology less dirty? And
Not
to
keep it dirty. What's wrong with it? Why not
it's
make
okay,
it
let's
more
get dirty.
dirty?
But we will make a dirty revolution here in Europe and elsewhere. This is the point of why the world needs anthropologists. This is the point of this debate. We have to do it now. Thank you very much. So this is the end of the debate. Ana Kirah, Jamer Khan, José Manuel dos Santos, Sarah Pink, and Rosa Perez. Thank you, everyone. Wait in the room, don't leave the room. We have to start the revolution, come on.
So as you could see, stepping down at conference in Stockholm, Meta Gorup is no longer a member of convening team, and to be honest, the loss was felt throughout the year. But unfortunately, Meta is not the only one to leave the team, and I'd like to invite Dan to share with us what's coming next in his career and what his aspirations are, because the rules of the network are strict, and there will need to be some changes.
Yeah. Okay, so I will stand here.
You already got a shit, so shit is not coming.
My shit is outside.
Yeah.
I left my shit outside, so I'm shitless and speechless. Yes, I started this conference, show, symposium, whatever you call it, with a personal confession, let's say. And I would also like to conclude it in style. Is there Sara Arco in the room? This is my wife.
Wow.
Yeah, she's there. Sara, I have to admit something. I have 4 children. 2 of them with you, 1 with my ex-wife, and 1 with this team of people here. The oldest one is Peter, the middle one is Gregor, the small one is Marco, and the smallest one has a very long name, Why the World Needs Anthropologists. And this is the moment, I always imagined, you know, I say sometimes at home, when the children will grow up, I will invite a brass band and they will play outside, and when they leave the home, and I will be dancing outside, celebrating. I will make it a special moment, but already now I know it's a bit different. So now I have very mixed feelings about it. So I'm happy and sad. I'm worried and I'm satisfied. And during this symposium, I kept thinking, how do I feel? And I realized I feel like Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. You know, yeah. Like, my precious. No. I'm not leaving you. But I trust you. I will give you this. No, but I don't. You will destroy it. You will destroy my child. No, but they are good people. Pavel, Veronica, Pablo. No, but they are bad. I hate them. You're not taking my child. Ah. But, like you said, I'm not our former Yugoslavian President Josip Broz Tito, who had the unlimited mandate. I have to eventually leave the network, and I have to leave the Why the World Needs Anthropologists to younger generations. But later we will have a discussion. Take care about it. Okay.
Is it a good Gollum or bad Gollum?
Sorry?
Was it a good or bad Gollum speaking now? Good Gollum.
No, it was me.
Yeah.
It was not a Gollum.
I
will show you the Gollum outside.
I'm losing track here.
So yeah, that is it. So I'm leaving the EASA Applied Anthropology Network convenorship this year, and I'm transferring the membership in the organizing committee of Why the World Needs Anthropologists to the people who will do it next year. So thank you everyone once more for everything. It was a real pleasure.
Wow, right.
You're wired.
Well done.
I will hug all of you now.
You did it.
I did it?
Yeah.
I did it all?
This was mine.
Oh, okay.
She's great. She's really awesome.
Okay, so I'm going to take advantage to also do something. I want Laura Cortulani to come on stage and explain the thing about the shits, because I know it created some confusions. Some people didn't quite understand why the speakers were receiving shits, right? So please, Laura, come here. Maybe we have to use this one. Yeah.
It's working? Yeah, thank you. Okay, just one more announcement that I think it was overlooked. We have a plenary session as well tomorrow with Alice Waterston. Yeah, it's coming. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just afraid not to be there. Yeah. Okay, sorry. So actually I was kind of overwhelmed not to explain what is with shits. I need to call them shits because the project that it's representing these shits, it's called Give a Shit. And Give a Shit project, it's literally giving a shit about real shit. So, but in detail, why poop and why excrements? Because the project, it's about sanitation, especially the toilets we used in our society, which is in developed world, and it's still using drinkable water. And it's one of our main concern in the project as well, not to focus just on the other, but really focus on our own problem. But hopefully in the future, give a shit, it's not only about the toilets, but really give a shit about problems we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the speakers deserve them because it was really top shit speakers. So thank you.
Okay.
Dear makers of all kinds, we hope you are closer to the understanding of how to think and act beyond disciplinary confines. The time for designing the future together is now. Enjoy the social event and see you tomorrow. We have just started. Thank you.